Hello and welcome to Dynamics Update. Today is one of those interview episodes, and with me as usual I have my dear colleague Gustav. Hello, Gustav.
Hello, my dear colleague Johan.
And we also have a friend that I met in Lisbon, actually. So with us is Nathan Clouse. Could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Nathan Clouse. I've been working with FNO /AX since version 2009. I started in the year 2009 as well.
Oh.
I just got introduced to that. I'd been working with other ERPs and I really liked AX, so I decided to stick with it. And I've stuck with it for almost 15 years now. And I've always focused on technical stuff. I started out as a developer, and that's branched out to everything tech. So integrations, not so much code anymore, but everything related to X++, now .NET, all the Azure stuff, and all the stuff around that.
Very cool. You also have a blog, right? The Atomic AX is your, I'm just gonna say child, but you're doing, right?
Actually, I have two blogs. I have Atomic AX, which is my personal blog. I focus on typically deep technical topics there. And then some of the US-based FNO MVPs, we put together dynamics.fo, where we release a lot of cataloged features, data entities, and security artifacts by major version that Microsoft releases. So you can see what's in there. Because historically, Microsoft hasn't done a really good job of telling you precisely what new features came in 10.0.32, for instance. So we put together a way to catalog that and release that just by version. Most of it links back to Microsoft stuff whenever it's available, but it gives you just a nice view of, when you look at a new update, you can see precisely what's in it.
That's very cool. That's like the old nerdier version and techier version of our Dynamics update, going even deeper. That's a very cool take. So what made you go to Atomic AX? I mean, what made you start to blog? Was that always an interest, or was it so much content around AX, so you had to write?
Actually, it's sort of a funny story. So I'd heard about the MVP award. Someone told me about it, and I was like, that'd be really cool. I'd like to sort of try and do that, just try and get that distinction. So I started blogging. And I didn't necessarily know exactly what I was doing the whole time, but I just sort of kept with it. And as stuff that I worked on changed, what I blogged about changed. So for instance, there was maybe 2 years where I focused on reports. So there's a lot of content on my blog related to 2012 and just getting to data. But as I just sort of stuck with it, I kept on writing about stuff. And eventually I got noticed and was awarded MVP, but it was almost 11, 12 years worth of work. So
very cool.
So worth it.
Yeah, I'm surrounded by MVPs here. I'm the only one, not an MVP in this podcast. I was nominated before, but I never had the time to fit it in. So we'll see when it happens next time. That's cool, but I think that's very well worth as well. That's the whole point, right? I think we discussed on many previous interviews as well as podcasts about how the community has evolved and changed with so much new information, right? But even back then in the 2009, we were limited from, like, official documentation was at least a little bit limited, even more limited. But the community has always been there, but now it's really exploded, right? Now it's all over the place with so much good content coming out as well. So it's almost too much, and sometimes it's hard to know where to go to find the best content. So I love the blog format very much because it's very nice. It allows for a deep dive into a specific topic, which is very nice. And I read a lot of your posts, so thank you for those.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, back when 2009 was around, there wasn't a lot of content. So that was something that I wanted to address, but also the best way to learn something when there is no documentation is to learn it yourself and hopefully help someone else out. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of funny. There've been 2 instances where I have wrote a blog post about something, entirely forgotten it, and then went to Google, and then it took me back to my own blog from something I wrote 7 years ago. And I was like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
So, I mean,
that should have a name. I think you happened to you as well, Johan. A lot of bloggers happen. It should have like a blogger syndrome or something. It's so common that it should have some kind of name, I think. But it's great, and I think that makes it all the more relevant, right? To keep doing it, because if you found it by Googling, I'm betting at least a lot of other people have had the exact same question and were helped. So that's very nice.
Yeah, that was actually the reason why I laughed, because I've done that a couple of times myself as well. I've searched for it because for some reason you formulate the question the same way every time, so that actually increases the risk of you ending up in your own blog, because you use the same words and so on. So I think that's interesting one, and I also the reason why I also write it down is I heard a podcast by a guy at Microsoft called Scott Hanselman, and he said something very smart one time. He said that in your lifetime you have a finite amount of keystrokes. Use them as efficiently as possible. And writing things down on a blog is more efficient than just writing them in an email to someone. So if you're going to write it down anyway, you might as well write it down in a blog and send a link to them.
It's a very wise man, I think, Hanselman. Very great podcast as well, Hansel Minutes. Cool. So, Nathan, what do you do mostly now? What's your area? I mean, we are both, as I mentioned before, both you and all of us three are quite technical, leaning towards it. When you described your background, it was kind of perfect match from my background as well. I started with AX 2009, developer, not doing as much code nowadays as I maybe would have liked to, but still everything technical around it. So what's your main area? I mean, today, do you have any larger areas that you try to focus on?
Really, it's more around integrations, integration design, and then solution delivery related to just about everything technical. Mm-hmm. So that can be stuff with DevOps. That could be stuff with Azure. There's a lot of different areas, but really just trying to deliver projects. So I'm project delivery. I'm not project support.
Implementation.
So that's what I mostly focus on. But my goal is to, when I transition off of delivery, that I have a set of artifacts and standard processes that I can give to the technical team. Say, when you have the newest rollout for Microsoft, even if there's no customizations, here's how you walk that through the process. Here's how you deliver, deploy to UAT and then to production. Whether it's through an automated process or just a technical or a process that's just Word and here's the buttons you click in LCS.
No, I was just going to say that, I mean, that whole process is a delivery in itself. Nowadays, even though if we just do standard, the ALM process has changed so much, or evolved, maybe is a better word for it, that these components that, going back to, again, AX 2009, you could do it all on your own, right? You could pretty much handle, even though a very efficient deployment, you could handle basic pretty much on your own without relying on any other component than AX and Windows Server, perhaps. But nowadays you need to understand all of the involved components, even in a very lightweight installation. So that in itself is a very important part of the implementation, right? Or also handover. So the DevOps pipelines, etc.
So one of the reasons why I actually thought about having you on the podcast was because you and I discussed a bit about Git and using Git in a finance and operations context. Every time you bring that up, everyone will say it's not supported by Microsoft. So, so first of all, what's the problem? And second of all, why would we like to use it anyway?
So I guess I'll answer the first question first.
Sure.
It's not supported by Microsoft. I'd say that's sort of a weak argument, because just because it's not supported by Microsoft for your specific implementation of how you want to use it, that doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't work. You just don't have support specifically for the way that you're using it. So Git with the X++ language. Microsoft will still support Git and X++. Just because you put the two together doesn't mean Microsoft says, I can't touch this. They'll still support both, just potentially not both together in an official capacity. But there's lots of stuff in the community. And X++ isn't that far away from C# that it really makes a huge difference. Sure, X++ has its own ALM story with DevOps pipelines and how we deliver, deliver our binaries and all that good stuff. But the distance between X++ and C# now relative to, let's say, back in 2009 is much, much smaller. So I think the support thing isn't as big of a deal. At the end of the day, it's just a programming language. It's a specialized programming language, but it's just a language. When I look at just projects, and specifically, Microsoft supports TFVC, and I don't want this to turn into just we're going to bash, TFS for 30 minutes. That has a very specific way that it likes to work, and that doesn't necessarily align with the way that developers are used to working now. So if you take a C# developer, they're probably already using Git, probably have already been using it for years. And if you want to teach them, or just have them deliver anything in X++, we have to say, oh, well, you have to go back to how TFVC works. And that is a very specific situation, or very specific scenarios in which it works and which it doesn't. And it's very sort of top tier enterprise, which is it dictates processes for you, where Git can be whatever you want it to be. If you want it to be just you've got one developer who's going to deliver everything, Git will work fine for that. If you have 40, Git will handle that too. So I just love using Git, and it's more just the way you build what you need and build those processes, and nothing else tells you how to operate. And typically, I'm a more senior resource, so I would get help. My job would be merging change sets. I had one client that had over 80 active developers at one point. My entire job was just managing change sets from all these different developers that were, committing code, which is fine. But, if you now look at how you could do that with Git, that's a very part-time role that is, they are on demand rather than just someone, my job was to quite literally catalog and merge change sets with TFVC.
Yeah. I just want to clarify a couple of things. So first of all, when we say it's not supported by Microsoft, it doesn't have anything to do with the actual product F&O. As you said, the only thing that is not supported is X++ together with Git. So it doesn't affect your support of F&O in any way, shape, or form. So if the people in the project, in the F&O implementation project, for instance, tells you it's not supported, then it's actually not their part that's not supported. It's your part that's not supported. And I also would like to clear up as well, because one thing I hear a lot is that people can't really separate Git from GitHub. And those aren't actually the same thing at all. Git is the sort of the way you manage code in a repository, and GitHub is basically a whole bunch of hosted repositories in the same place. So, and of course, I'm making it extremely simple because GitHub is a lot more than that. But from this perspective, GitHub is basically just the place where you could place your Git repository. In most cases, when we talk Git, we actually have Git in DevOps instead of in GitHub, because the reason is that we have, as you said, we have a couple of specialized pipelines. We have the entire project,
not the least,
in itself. There we have all of the changes, all of the backlog items, all of the work items, and so on. So there is no reason to actually move it out of DevOps, because DevOps is very much integrated to LCS and the way we work. But with that being said, why would we like to use Git instead of VSTC?
I think it's just, so when I talk about Git, I'm usually looking at it through the lens of project delivery. So when you're looking at project delivery, you have the base F&O product, and then you're going to have, usually at least 5, maybe 10 customizations that you need to deliver in order to deliver the whole project. And that typically means, let's say, 3 to 5 developers, all working on different initiatives, all committing code for the project. When you look at how TFVC does it, or just TFS for short, there's a very strong pattern you must follow as prescribed by Microsoft on how to build your branches, how you how you construct your branches, how you do your build pipelines, all that good stuff. Which is fine. Like there's nothing wrong with it. I just think Git is more organic to how we want to work. And mostly when talking with senior resources, I've been doing this for a while. I don't want to necessarily go out and find when my devs have done something and I need to look at it. I want them to alert me that they need me for something. Otherwise, if there's no communication that they need my help, I don't necessarily get it. And that's one of the key benefits of Git is the idea of a pull request. So that's built into the Git control system. And both DevOps and GitHub do it. There's also GitLab. You can host Git yourself if you want. There's all kinds of options, but Git, the source control engine, is what I'm most interested in. So when you're looking at for instance, it seems like every project you have to modify the check report. It doesn't matter, even if they take everything out of the box. There's the check report that needs to have a few things moved around.
Yeah.
And when looking at Git, you can say, here's my primary branch or my main line. I'm gonna create a branch just to work on my check. That's like a virtual workshop for just working on your check. You assign it to a developer. They deliver a spec. And then create a pull request to say, hey, I'm done. That goes to a more senior resource. They review it, it gets approved, and then it can automatically be integrated into your main code branch, your main code line, and then using DevOps, automatically deployed out to your sandbox environment for someone to actually look at. And then there's all sorts of room in between for automated testing, whether it's ATL, systest, or RSAT. There's just a lot of value that you can get based on having a more organic structure to how you deliver code in a project. But the project itself still has to be delivered sort of like a normal, ordinary project. There's things that we have to do. There's success by design from Microsoft for guidance. But code can be sort of, I don't want to say wishy-washy, but we can be more flexible because depending on when we get those customization requests, whether it's at the beginning of the project or at the end, there'll typically be like a swell of developers, and then we go down to 0 developers. And Git handles that really well.
Cool. Very good description of Git. And also to be clear, I mean, where does Git fit in the process? As you said, Johan, it's not like you do Git and it's like this dramatic shift in how you work in your project. It's a better source control process, right? Depending on what you need to do. So it's about the point is just it's not supported now in the same way that Visual Studio 2019 wasn't supported until recently, at least for some of the work, right? So probably in the near future, if you get a question in somewhere saying, well, we're not going to use Git because it's not supported, the point we're saying here is that look into that argument because it's not really the driver here. If Git works for you or your project or your organization or your maintenance team or whatever, where you need to input it, just put in the effort of understanding what it actually does rather than looking at if it's supported or not. Because I don't think, as you said, they're not going to reject your support request if you pose it, right? It's still going to be valid.
Not unless your support request has to do with checking in code specific. Or automatically building from a pipeline,
right?
And so on. But that's a very specific case. But I would also like to lift another reason why Git is probably a good option, and that is that for the segment of customer that we are working with when it comes to ERP, most of them have some sort of development in-house. It could be like scripts for IT, it could be Power BI reports, it could be a lot of different things that they are working on. I think it was from the Phoenix project, they said that every company that doesn't have development, I mean, every company is some sort of IT company anyway. So in-house development is getting more and more important. So I would say also that many customers are already using Git in in some way, shape, or form. They have a Git repository or multiple ones. They might have them in GitHub. They might have them in Azure DevOps, but they do have them, and they're used to using them, and they have processes around them. So having X++ as the only project that doesn't use Git in this case is probably an anomaly and would probably cause issues rather than solve them.
Yeah. So I mean, like, just as a call out, when you create a new Azure DevOps project, the very first, if it's your first project, you really have to go out of your way to make it TFVC. It's like a hidden setting inside of a hidden setting for you to say, I want this to not be Git. I want this to actually be TFVC. So there was a chart that I saw that sort of compared the two. And TFVC is still a valid and good source control system, but it's more for your high governance, slow to react, on purpose types of code bases or repositories or industries where specifically you want to have stuff move slow because there might be some governance in place that you can't get around, or it has to go to some third party who has a 3-week backlog to approve the change request or whatever whatever it may be. But Git is more, I don't like to use the word agile because I think that might have some connotation for some people who hear that word. But it's more for rapid development. So for instance, let's say I had a customer show up today and says, hey, I want to go live in 6 months. I need these 6, here's some 6 requirements. I'm going to need 6 developers and we want to deliver them in 2 weeks. With TFVC, that's actually a lot of work to deliver that. With Git, in probably 45 minutes, I can set that up and have my developers in there, assuming they have a machine that they can use, and my developers can start developing and delivering in as little as 45 minutes. Yeah, there's just a lot of value just in terms of, just being able to do stuff organically and rapidly rather than, use TFVC. But from this chart that I saw, the quote that just made me laugh was when comparing, Microsoft owns GitHub and Microsoft owns Azure DevOps. They said, GitHub is their favorite child, and TFVC, Azure DevOps, is their third favorite child. And they don't have 3 kids, so it's just, and that just made me laugh.
Explains a lot, yeah. And I mean, it also makes a lot of sense in like the developer story, as you mentioned, like working in a tool set. Git is one of them, of course, but like that you're used to working with is such a huge benefit because, again, going back to, we have to stop using this 2009 reference, but it's an interesting point because then you were an X++ developer, and even though the code, like, it's similar, it's still that kind of skill set was pretty special, right? But now it's more and more similar. It's again more calls across tiers, across different services. The C# reference is very good, so it's more natural now, I think, to switch from maybe working with C#. You can move into the business logic is like what you need to understand, but the code and the programming language is very similar. And then the development, the IDE, the development environment is also similar, and it makes it easier to onboard new developers to Dynamics as well. So it makes sense to try to align at least. I've always had the feeling or the sense that AX and Dynamics is like 2 years, at the very least 2 years behind the regular like developer scene. I think maybe in some cases we're 5 years behind the regular developer scene, but we're catching up, right? And it makes it easier because then you're not tied to these older versions, and you can, as you say, you can be up and running in a much more efficient process if we all use pretty much the same tools. And then you have the business logic, and ERP is complex as it is, but if you don't have to learn a new programming language all in itself, it makes things easier.
Yep. And one thing to consider, like when looking at C#, so I have a brother, he does C#, and he sort of picks on me because if you look at the tooling that we have for X++ to automate our deployments, a lot of it came out within the last 2 years, and it's pretty good. But then I was like, hey, like, look at all this cool stuff he can do. And he's like, hey, watch this. And then he shared his screen, and he's on Slack, and he's like, all right, I just queued a build. All right, I'm gonna just preemptively approve it to be deployed to UAT, and he's just working in Slack. So we have a ways to go, but we have some great tooling now as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, with the control and the rigorosity that is also sometimes needed in ERP, maybe not doing auto build from Slack is like the end goal for all here on the ERP side, but I understand what you mean. And automating those processes, the one you described before is where we're driving at now. I mean, doing that development work easily and doing the controlled process of actually auditing the code is also important. But then once that's done, just automate it, move it to SIT, move it to staging, sandbox, or whatever you need to, where you start actually validating it from a business logic perspective, because that's also needed, or doing automated tests. So that those options are now more available to us. But still, it's not next finish for all of them. You still need to understand and set them up. So it's another skill set that's similar now if we can use the functionality in Azure DevOps and Azure pipelines.
Yeah, and I have a lot of interest in automated testing because I think that can really help drive value for delivery, because it might cost, let's say, and this number may be shocking to some, but let's say you invest $50,000 in automating your testing during your implementation, but then you can use that for all 7 updates you get from Microsoft. It's highly likely you'll get that $50,000 back and then some within the first year or two for just automated testing to confirm your core and critical processes execute, for your specific configurations with your data, and everything still works based on 10.03 came out, or whatever the version is. And you can just validate that happens based on just pipelines doing work. Didn't take any people dedicating any extra time from their day, so you don't have to redirect business activities to testing.
Exactly.
And that can become especially valuable with all the features that come out. Sometimes they come out turned on. So that's why over here in the US we put together Dynamics.fo, because there were like a lot of warehousing stuff now just gets flipped on, or if it's out for 3 versions, then it gets flipped on. You need to make sure that stuff still works as expected. There's no bugs introduced or anything like that, and that's very rare, but it does happen. And when you look at just how many configurations you can have inside of F&O for all the different countries that are supported, for all the different processes that are required inside those different countries, Microsoft can't test every possible, billions of permutations for every config that's out there.
That's a very wise sentiment, and I think maybe from a time perspective, Johan, we should try to close off with those wise words that invest into automated testing. Again, with all the tools that are available to us now, ATL and all the readiness tools that we have available to us, make sure to invest in those, because a couple of hours spent on automating your tests is very well worth the investment.
Yeah, exactly. So I usually say that short-term automatic testing is really, really, really expensive, but long-term it gets cheaper because it's an investment. So, but with that, I think it's time to finish up this episode. So, Nathan, do you have any closing words?
I guess sort of tailing on what you said. I was actually speaking with another MVP earlier today, and we were talking about the difference in 10 years of experience. When looking at automated processes in any sense of the word, I think of that as you've gotten 10 years of experience, meaning you've got 10 years of unique experience. If we don't start making investments in sort of automating away the stuff that doesn't add a lot of value, we get the same 1 year repeated 10 times.
Yes.
And that's not exactly 10 years of experience. That's just 10 years.
Yeah. That's 1 year of
sad,
experience.
But very, very true, but sad.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you, Nathan, for joining us. And thanks for a nice talk and enlightening information about Git. It was really helpful. Thank you.
Very good.
And hope to be able to get you back at some point.
Yeah, hope to see you on a conference near soon as well. Take care, Nathan. Thank you so much.
They'll be invited back over to Europe sometime soon.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.